So just by way of introduction, I'm talking to Bongani Morgan, who is a director based in Joburg, and he's done a bunch of commercial work for Iwisa, Bokomo, Red Bull, and F&B, to name a few. And he's also been doing a bunch of dockies, mainly sports dockies, like Mapimpi, the famous South African rugby player, and Rural Diamonds, which follows a bunch of sports stars coming from the Eastern Cape. So yeah, welcome, Bongani. So the first question that I have for you is the same question that I really ask anybody who I'm interested in, which is, what made you want to become a director?
A quick answer. I blame my parents and I blame James Cameron. Yeah, at the early age of 5, because that's truly when I recall my first sort of love affair with cinema was watching Terminator 2 Judgment Day on VHS. And one of the most striking images alongside the story was the crushing of the human skulls as the robots come in. Over the course of the story, following this young boy running from these two dudes, not fully grasping the deep implications, my mom said to me, I turned to her at the end of the film and I said, whoever's responsible for the entire that, I wanted to be that. So it didn't fully manifest until grade 10-ish when I made my intentions clear to the family that I really think I might be a filmmaker. I want to be a filmmaker. And my mom said, well, it makes sense because since when you're 5 years old, you told me once you watch this film, this is what you want it to be. So that's a very short version of the story.
Okay, so yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question was because everyone's got a story like that of like their favorite film, especially when they were young. And I remember seeing Terminator 2 as a young person as well, and it just blew my mind. And of course, it's very topical now that Skynet is sort of becoming a reality.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, okay, so you had Terminator 2, which in my opinion is the best of the franchise, although Terminator
Absolutely.
1 was actually pretty good too. These days, when you're watching stuff for yourself, what genres and styles are you currently being drawn to? And like what movies are you watching?
This demands a retrospect answer because for me, at first, growing up on action cinema or sci-fi, I used to think I was going to be like the next Michael Bay. You know, he's got such a visual language that's super cool that it informed a lot of filmmakers, I'd say, from like the 2010s to probably the mid-20s. But then the more I grow into it, it's more story. I don't know if that sounds pretentious, but it's more the scope and the mysticism of the story that carries a scale. And that might inform the conceit, which is the genre tropes that audiences associate with. So a big fan of story, so character, drama at its essence is what I look for. And then you can embellish it with the other genre tropes and whistles and dials, yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, obviously, like a big criticism of Hollywood at the moment is that it's all special effects and very little story or character development. But I must say, I was pleasantly surprised by a bunch of movies that came out in 2025 that acted contrary to that really had great stories, great characters. You know, like the one that's really popping into my mind now is Train Dreams. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
Yes,
but there
Brilliant.
were a bunch. Eddington as well. What were your favorite films of 25?
Yeah, very good chat. So Train Dreams, not widely spoken about despite the fact that it's on Netflix. It's such a shame. It's a true cinephile's film. I mean, you got your tentpole pictures that are dominating, but for me, the surprise film that really like knocked me out, there's a couple, but it's Frankenstein. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. That is just, I think, a most complete reimagining of Mary Shelley's work and imbued with del Toro's ultimate sensibilities. It really is a film you can feel he was born to make on top of the great oeuvre he has, you know. So Frankenstein, Train Dreams, No Other Choice by the master himself, Park Wan-chuk. He's constantly redefining South Korean cinema and at large world cinema. And then from a local point of view, man, there's been some really good gems from a South African perspective. I'm just trying to think. What's cool, well, I'll speak from a South African front, is there's a new injection of the new wave of South African filmmakers that have come through. And it's, for me, one of the things I've always wanted to see, that what's the new wave going to be like. And some of them that I've been exposed to or told about, they've got this unapologeticness, that hunger to go back to story. And hopefully that will inform the South African visual language, which I don't think we have yet. We're very much a hodgepodge of Western influences for the most part, most certainly Hollywood and all of its tropes. And we've got the capabilities. We certainly are world class, from directors, producers to technical teams. But it's just a matter of finding the intention to recreate our own visual palette, very much like how African cinema is very raw, stark, naturalistic. We're a bit more polished. It's good, but it's what's the stories that sort of support the visual styles that might come and that will come. So yeah, I'm waxing a lot more there. But those are my top 3 films so far from an international footprint. I need to think about this deeply because there's been some deeply arresting films. And I'm also going back to the classics, revisiting the works of Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men, just seminal. Superman came out, then I had to go back to Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. And yeah, man, it's what I'm appreciating what you're saying is there's a focus on story. I mean, Sinners fired on all cylinders. It's definitely my top 5 of films, probably top 3. It's just so stylishly well made and competently just well calibrated, despite the fact I've got some narrative issues with it, but I think for the most part it doesn't stand in the way too much of it being a really, really, really good film. Just shy of being great, I think.
Yeah. What you said about the South African... Do you have anything to add in terms of South African stuff that you've seen in 2025?
My brain has gone to mush for some reason, but to add into the context of us discussing South African cinema, I was rewatching A Lollipop. I don't know if you recall. Yeah, brilliant. I think it needed this new viewpoint now, much more mature. A Lollipop, man, is a beautiful film that again speaks to the potential of what South African cinema is. Well, thank God I remembered. There's a film called Carissa, a coming of age story. It's directed by 2 directors. I think they're brothers from the Karoo, Western Cape side, if I'm not mistaken. It's a beautiful, meditative coming-of-age story about a young lady who's from a very obscure part of the Western Cape. She, without giving too much of a spoil, because I do feel South Africans most certainly have to watch this. There's an inciting incident that forces her to sort of go deeper into the Karoo, where she has to confront the mortality of life and being part of a bigger picture. And man, the visual language of that film, I don't know if you've seen Chloe Zhao's Nomadland. Very similar, just
yes.
Quiet, still, meditative, being part of a bigger world. And you fall in love with the country, with that very different part of the country, because I feel like too many parts of SA has been commercialized. We know the Sandton skyline. We know the Durban Pavilion skyline. We know the Mother City skyline. But to see that section of SA, the Karoo, the Western Cape, Carissa, highly recommended.
The Karoo is very photogenic, I always think. So when you said Nomadland, I also thought about Lean on Pete. It's kind of an obscure movie about a horse and a boy. And it also made me think a little bit about, I always think with the Karoo, it makes me think about Dave Porter, who did Breaking Bad. Because he shoots the stuff in New Mexico. Where is it exactly? It's
all right. So like Death Valley type of area. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of very stark, and the windswept plains and the high clouds and the big blue skies and all of that, and it works really well for South African stuff as well, I think. And I think the Karoo is definitely, in some ways, it's a filmmaker's dream, because all you need to do is just put a camera there and just let the wind blow past. Okay, so. One thing that I'm quite interested in talking to you about is that I'm seeing like a through line in terms of Mapimpi and Rural Diamonds, that there's like you've done these docues on sports. Are you actually like a sports guy?
Very good question. I am. I'm a sports fanatic. Always have been. Look, it's weird how life works, because sitting now at this position I'm in, I'm able to sort of reflect back on some of these weird choices that led me to this path, and one of them is probably being a sports mega fan. It all started around December, Boxing Day. You all sort of stuffed up with food. No one really knows what to do with you. You don't know what to do with yourself, so you're sort of like channel hopping, belly full, think, yeah, the early 2000s, I channel hop again onto SABC3. I see the cricket game on. My first sort of encounter with the sport. Could not understand what in the holy hell was going on. Dudes are standing around all day. There's really not much action. It's just guys are throwing a ball. And then a batsman is tapping the pitch and it's just doing weird things. And through that curiosity, I'm like, what the hell are they doing? Each time I'd like leave it, come back on, the camera's at a different position, sound plays have shifted. Like, what is this? So over time, I sat and I fell in love with it, just reading it through it. And then, of course, football, watching the World Cups. Long story short, 2009, I was in grade 9 at the time, and I was reading a lot of these fictional, I forgot the author's name, cricket books and footballing books, stories. And they were quite technical, so you'd see formations and all the stuff. I'd embedded in the story. And I attempted my own book, a novella on this guy called Stephen George, running a team called Stormbreaker. It's actually kind of very much what Ted Lasso's about. It doesn't have obviously the quips, but he's just a homegrown footballing coach who's trying to revive this team, a bit of like Field of Dreams if you want. So I wrote that subsequently, and life happens. 2019, suppose 10 years to the date, I get appointed to direct a sports reality series called the Nedbank Yona Team Search, which is this talent footballing search show for the next wave of South African footballers. So those parallels in life are there, man. And yeah, it leads to doing works with like my Pimpies, uncovering works like Rural Diamonds, which feels like a spiritual sequel to Mapimpi because, number one, Mapimpi's from the Eastern Cape. Rural Diamonds profiles for Eastern Cape international award-winning athletes. And it's asking the question really of like, what is it about the Eastern Cape that keeps churning out these golden diamonds, these rural diamonds, so to speak? Yeah, I think I've been rambling on for a bit, but definitely a sports fan. I mean, love football. I love locally. I'm a Kaizer Chiefs fan. We're not doing very well at the moment. Nationally, it would be Liverpool. That's football. But I'm really a fan of all sports. I've been privileged enough to go to a school where I could expand myself and find my way through a lot of the sporting codes. In SA, we're blessed, man, to probably being one of the rare countries to have most sporting codes represented.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And I must say, I think there is something like really interesting about how sports definitely follows a similar narrative arc, say, for example, to like the hero's journey, I guess you could say.
100%.
Even if your team doesn't win, like that's then part of the struggle. Like the hero has to go through the struggle. So when your team is losing, that's you get down there with them and you're suffering along with them. And then when they do eventually come out, God willing, they do eventually make it up. Then it makes the victory all the sweeter. And there's something really compelling. And you can see this in the rise, for example, of one of Netflix's biggest success stories of the last couple of years is all of those amazing sports docus that have been coming out. I mean, at first it was the F1 thing, and then they did, I forget what, they've done tennis, they've done the Tour de France, like all of them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I think and what's interesting about South Africa is that we've got this kind of unique cultural climate where sports is one of the things that really binds us together as a nation. Yeah. And I think that makes for something very interesting because like the conflicts that happen on and off the sports field in some ways reflect the conflicts that are happening within South Africa as well.
Yeah, within our own lives too, so it's sort of like they wear all of our sort of fears and fantasies, and that's probably why we champion them so much, because they really do hold all our aspirations to the test.
With Mapimpi and Rural Diamonds, I've seen that there's obviously this kind of Eastern Cape through line, and it just sort of, as a matter of curiosity, I thought, is there a connection for you personally to the Eastern Cape, or is it just that those stories led you there?
From a lineage point of view, I do know my mother's mom, my grandmom, was from the Eastern Cape. So there is that spiritual connection. And then, the stories keep drawing me there for some reason or other. And aside from that too, it's been weird. It's just the stories, and it happens to be these Xhosa not Xhosa, but Eastern Cape based sort of superstars. So
So when you
something
say
Lilo was trying to tell me.
Xhosa, not Xhosa, what's the distinction you're making there? Is that not Xhosa in Eastern Cape necessarily?
Yes, because it's very important to sort of be very clear. Just like the human race is very, very weird, or the tribes, because it gets very specific, the subcultures or the breeds. I mean, you've got the Xhosa nation, but that's just an umbrella term. Then you've got the Amakhachabe, then you've got, there's all kinds of tribes within it. Very much like in the Zulu sort of clan, you see the Zulus, but back in the day before Shaga unified all the clans, there was no such thing as a Zulu nation. It was, so my surname would be Mbata. That's all you'd be known as. You're not a Zulu, you're just a dude from the Mbata clan. So likewise with the Xhosas, but it's very important when you're in Xhosa land to be aware of that, because you can't just point at someone and say you're a Xhosa. If they see themselves as Mpondo, which is a specific sub-tribe of the Xhosa, for a lack of a better term, you'll get cussed out. You'll be like, whoa, watch your mouth. That's not me. I'm this specific term. Hence, I caught myself, because of those learnings, revisiting the Eastern Cape a lot of times. So, yeah, man.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's like a sort of blanket term that doesn't adequately describe really what's going on there. I'll have to bear that in mind myself, because I can be a bit blanket. I'm always talking about the Eastern Cape choirs, because there's a very strong choral tradition there as well.
Really?
Yeah. The Eastern Cape, in terms of the music, it's like it's quite a heavy thing as well. So neatly to segue to this idea of South African stories, and we've been talking a little bit about South African stories and how we're just starting to develop a kind of vocabulary for what might make a South African story, and a visual vocabulary as well as a dramatic vocabulary. So this is obviously like a complicated question, and I'm tempted to ask, what is it that makes a South African story a South African story? But that is obviously something we're only starting to discover, I think, because we've been so strongly influenced by countries from other parts of the world. But what I would like to just start with, as we're interrogating this question, is what is a South African story that you feel like you would love to tell?
I'm currently working on one now, something that's supposed to be it's a feature film. I think the ambition of it is we really do owe our audiences just the caliber of immersive storytelling that you can get lost in, where they eventually translate into a TV thing or streamer, and you can get plugged in at your home, but you still need to have that communal experience with your fellow South Africans to be like, oh my God, we got lost in this world for this specific point of time. So it really is a story for me, without giving much away of the plot. I'm sort of concocting. It's a story about walking in all of our shoes. We're so multifaceted, multi-ethnic, multi-diverse, in and around, just say, for example, an African man or woman. The levels of depth and layering of multi-ethnic dynamism within that is insane. Then you add in the complication of the other cultures within your race, and then the bigger world. So we've only just touched on the surface of that, and I think there's so much more that could be investigated. And the beauty is that it's going to manifest in a lot of horror films, historical fantasies, action. I'm a bit tired of the social drama aspect of it. I think it's cool to acknowledge it, but I think we're far more deeper than our polarities as a people, the poverty and the wealth. We're a bit more than that. The townships and the suburbia. We're more than that. And that's for me, the essence of what a South African story could be, is a lot of young, I suppose even the experienced filmmakers, storytellers, any artist really. We're well inundated with the American culture of entertainment. You can recite the history of Hitchcock and Orson Welles. What about our own? And it's something I'm trying to interrogate ourselves, because, man, we've had some epic filmmakers across the years. I'm talking 70s cinema, 60s cinema. Holy hell, the 19B cinema. I mean, we are one of the oldest film industries in the world when it began, I think just behind Morocco. Kilani was where it was happening in 1890s. Like what? And yeah, so of course our political history, there's a lot of that because I think somewhere in the 80s there were a lot of Africana films commissioned that really were high quality. And then of course with the rise of Mr. Simon Sabela, I think the first acknowledged black director, actor, playwright, but when he first made the first cinematic black story, that was like, I think in the 70s, he blew the lid. And whilst, yeah, then there was something that happened in the industry where there was a lot of these films, but they were not really certified as proper films because of politics and etc. So there's so much history we as South African creatives can tap into by looking inward in our own history. But the challenge again, it's not widely accessible, South African films, because we're also trying to effectively rebuild our own industry. I mean the film, theatrical filmmaking industry. We've got the commercial industry, man, is certainly world class. The documentary part is world class. Our TV is booming, even though I feel like it's hitting a bit of a lull from a quality point of view. There's too many reality shows, too many on-trend IP that's out there where we need to be a bit more inventive. And this is an appeal and a challenge to the broadcasters, the streamers, the money people. You know, we need more patrons of South African cinema, whether it manifests in high-end TV or whatever.
And I suppose an appeal to the audiences as well to like look beyond the realities and, you know, even look beyond the sort of imperfect offerings that are out there at the moment. But still go out and support them, because if they're not supported, then they're just not going to get made.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I've got my personal bee in a bonnet is because I love the Western genre. I mean, as much as we talk about wanting to do South African stuff, obviously, I suppose, as we all are, we're all very influenced by American cinema, and I love the Western genre. But I've got this little bee in my bonnet that I want us in South Africa to stop making South African Westerns and just start making Southerns.
Coin it, patent it.
I've coined it.
Said it first,
coined it already. I'm trying to plant the seed in as many people as I can,
because
I think that there's really a lot there. I mean, when you think about, like, for example, how Johannesburg came to be, and how whenever, like, it was basically the biggest gold rush on the planet, and when you think of the kind of drama that follows gold, I mean, there was basically a whole civil war that was fought about the thing. Not to mention
a couple of them,
all of the other stuff that surrounds the gold, like the numbers gangs and the gangsters. That's where all of that stuff originated from as well.
No ways. No, I'm intrigued because part of my thing is like learning about the Voortrekkers, how they mission across inland SA, getting on top of mountains. I'm sure there must have been raiders raiding them, all kinds from different tribes, the Khoi raiders, the Zulu raiders, the Tswana raiders, all kinds of shit must have been going down as the gold reserves are being discovered.
Okay, so I do want to get into music at a certain point as a person that is very into music. But before we do that, I just wanted to do a quick thing on commercial, because, you know, as we've been mentioning in this discussion, we've seen how South African commercials are on par with global stuff. Like, we're consistently winning, or ranking highly in Cannes, and really making awesome commercials. And obviously, it's a problem that it doesn't translate necessarily to the other aspects of filmmaking. But at this point, it nonetheless remains like a really important way for young, or not just say young, but any film director to actually make a living, and at a very high level as well. So in your commercial work, and I see, you know, you've done work with Iwisa, Bacomo, Red Bull, F&B, Hollywood Bets, the list goes on. So you've obviously done like a fair amount of work with ad agencies. And I was just wondering, how do you find that collaboration when it comes to working with creatives in agencies?
Yeah, very, very good question, and a valid one at that. Man, I'm such a creative. I'm a nerd. So when you get to the opportunity and the privilege to be considered for for being a big part of translating this idea. It's a huge honor. And then you tap into the mindset of the creatives, the guys who actually come up with this, the copywriter, the art director, the creative director, where they like, this is what the client wants, this is their mandate, but man, we've got such a cool in to their audience, into how, and it's just that inherent enthusiasm for them just to be creatives, because that's what we're about. It's deeply spiritual. So when you can feel that from the creatives, it inspires me to really find a way to bring myself to the problem solved. For the most part, my collaborations with the creators has been incredible. Certainly when you understand the insights into why they want to tell this particular story for this particular brand or product, it's like mind-blowing. Case in point was Iwisa. Very odd brief to land on my desk. And the original sort of scope of the brief was 3 stories. And I think it was supposed to be like this integrated campaign, but the client chose story 2, which was clever of them, because there was something so contained and so uniquely South African about that, and how everyone saw the big picture, passion, enthusiasm of recreating this iconic SA sitcom called Suburban Bliss. You know, so it was, and you telling the story of Iwisa and how wholesome it is in bringing together multi-cultures together in a. At the time, Suburban Bliss was this interrogation of post-apartheid SA in a suburban sense. How do the whites feel about black neighbors and vice versa, and the blacks elevating? So yeah, it's been incredible because, you know, a lot of credit does not go to the creative teams in terms of how much work goes into the work, the briefs. By the time we get a brief, it's been discussed 1 billion times, it's been repitched over the course of a year or years, and it might still change even if you are involved. So it's a lot of credit I have to give to the creators to come and break down these corporate structures in an inventive way to make it sing to audiences. It's a privilege. And they call upon us to sort of extend our services to help them. It's super awesome when the right briefs come, meaning the right story, the right circumstances that activates your sensibilities as a director. I'll speak candidly. There's been some opportunities where you learn on the job, where you find hindsight, you're not really meant for this type of brief, but you do the best you can. It's part of life.
Of course. And it's all such a great learning process as well, because like even if the circumstances aren't perfect, you're still put into a situation where you're having to perform at a very high level. And that then gives you confidence to move your storytelling, or in my case, my music making, outside of the commercial place and still be able to stand behind it and say, I'm confident in what I'm able to do with my craft. And you can point to your commercial portfolio and say, and this is why we can see that we're able to produce high quality work. And yeah, as you're saying, kudos to the creatives within that industry, because it's really obviously super hard to bring in a compelling narrative and be able to actually move product for your client, which is ultimately what their mandate is. Because people's radars are up. They don't want to be sold stuff unless it's really awesome stuff. So yeah, kudos to those creatives who really managed to pull that off. And it's such a great challenge to us as creatives within that ecosystem to be able to help that in whatever way we can. And yeah, sometimes we do it better than others, but it's always just amazing experience, I think.
Yeah, it's all servitude, man. It's like, I think my biggest thing when I look at the commercials work or industry, you can find so much of a distinct voice as an artist. And if you have the chops and the luck and the know-how to do it long enough to find your distinct voice, amazing. But it shouldn't get in the way of the bigger picture, which is you're in service. You're called upon to help be a big part of the picture, a bigger part of the picture.
Yeah, and I must say that's been quite a learning curve for me personally, because as a musician, like in my early 20s, you know, like a young, shallow 20-year-old, you know, my goal was to be a rock star. And so you kind of, that's another great thing about working in the commercial world, is that you quickly learn that you are not a rock star until you've really earned your stripes. You can't just walk in there and be a rock star. You have to really adjust your attitude to that of being of service. Otherwise you're just not going to be able to do the job properly.
Absolutely.
And as such, and I will also say, I think that that's what the best rock stars do as well. The best rock stars are actually being of service as well, and that's been their attitude from the get go. Even if they're
100%.
doing it in whatever way that they're doing it, ultimately what they're doing is they're providing humanity with a story or inspiration or whatever it may be. They are providing some kind of service.
Hey, like what you're saying there, because if funny enough, another career possibility, because I used to play drums. Well, I played all kinds of musical instruments at school. I'm very lucky to have played the marimba. I think the only instrument I really would love to still learn when I get time is a guitar. I played drums, played marimbas, drums, so a lot of the percussionist instruments. And then in high school, I formed a rock band.
Yeah.
Because part of my thing was not, before it clicked in grade 10, if not film, definitely something writing. Because I wrote to a lot of my mates at school, comic strips, would paste it all over the notice boards and stuff. I'd write storylines and draw. I wish I could draw. We formed a band because there was, when I watched School of Rock all the way back in 2005, my first encounter, that's when I fell in love with the genre, with the thing, because I knew from early on the conceit is to serve the people, rock the nation, stick it to the man. How he, Jack Black brought it out is, and it really is. It's about being in service to a bigger picture, which is really rocking people. And there is something synonymous. And funny enough, most of the DOPs I've worked with, my most profound collaborations, a lot of them are musically inclined, which is a thing. So everything is music. Everything is maths. Maths is the manifestation of everything. So there you are. Rock on, man. But now let me flip the game a bit. What compelled you? What was the bug that made you to be a rocker? And how did you discover your sensibility? And when was that?
So I had always been into music. My parents would always play me music as a kid, and it would always just like spellbind me. I would just stop whatever I was doing and listen. And that was always a thing. And it wasn't until later that I realized that that didn't happen to every kid, that thing of listening. And I will say that I think that is actually my superpower as a musician, is not actually like, I'm not a natural like virtuoso guitarist or musician in any way, but what I am is a passionate listener. I just love listening to music and just getting lost in the sounds. But then came a time in early high school when, well, my parents had to send me to boarding school because we just lived in this small little town outside of Kimberley. So they sent me into Kimberley to boarding school, and there were just like so many rules and bells for this, bells to wake up, bells to go have breakfast, bells to do, and all of the discipline and all of that. And I really rebelled against that a lot. And part of that rebellion was finding punk rock music and, like really obscure punk bands generally, but metal bands apart from that, and just like really digging into that and indulging my inner rebel. And later on, realizing that I had to rebel against the rebel as well. I had to realize that actually I like commercial stuff too. I actually really like a lot of commercial music, that a lot of my punk rock friends would be like, "Oh, what are you doing listening to that?" And I'd be like, I like it. I think it's cool. So there was that. And then also like at a certain point, getting into electronic music a lot as well. Once hip hop and house music and all of that started really coming into its own in the late 80s and early 90s. Just around, sorry, I say early 90s, probably for me it was more like mid 90s when I was a teenager.
Okay.
That all of that stuff really started coming alive for me, and that was electronic music, which was another big thing for me. But at the same time, there was all of this stuff happening in the background from my early days of my mom having played me a lot of classical music and Beethoven and all of those classical guys, Stravinsky, and just eventually realizing that I just love it all. Like it does, like the genres. By the time the 2000s rolled around, I was like, actually, I don't specifically identify with any particular genre, but I do identify with certain attitudes. Like don't listen to any particular genre of music. I just listen to good music, as they say. As such, that is my goal when it comes to creating music, obviously, as well. I don't create music in any particular genre, but I like to think that I create
Yeah.
good music.
Yeah,
But
man.
obviously, that's also like with varying degrees of success. Like I've made a lot of bad music in my time as well, in order to get to that place of making
You have to
hopefully
earn.
good
You
music.
have to earn your stripes, man. It's true. It's like I look back at some of my work, just coming up earlier on, being hungry for any opportunity, and you make this professional work that you build on, and you look back in the greater context of your greater bodies, like yeesh. And the beauty is you need to start somewhere. You have to start crawling before you run and so forth or walk. And
Yeah,
that's the beauty of it, man.
yeah, it's
Awesome.
part
I
of
mean,
the journey.
that's we could unpack more. But now, what's your geez, and how are you feeling about one more question I'm throwing your way? How are you feeling about
Yeah,
the
sure.
use of music in South African entertainment? Certainly, we'll start with films, TV shows, and then most certainly commercials. How are you feeling about the use and yeah, what are your thoughts about what could be improved? What are some of the misgivings that you're feeling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of what we do in terms of filmmaking hinges around like non-South African practice, I guess you could say, like sort of ideas and or not just Hollywood ideas, but European stuff as well.
Yes.
And I think that that remains to a large degree, even if it is sort of African on some level. I think that there probably there is coming a time where we become more aware of who we are as Southern Africans and really start developing our own language. But I will say, like, I think that's also it's easier said than done. I think one can only do that by iterating and like just keep making music. So
Absolutely.
in terms of South African music at the moment, obviously on the world stage, like Amapiano has done like a big thing over the last 10 or so years.
Yeah.
And now obviously
Yeah.
Afrotech is doing a thing. So in terms of electronic music, that's doing good things. Yeah, I mean, South Africa's always like actually in many ways punched above its weight in terms of music. You know,
Yeah.
we've had the likes of Ladysmith Black Mambazo or
Yeah.
Hugh Masekela or Miriam Makeba or any of those guys who really became huge international stars. But I will say I don't think that necessarily translated into filmmaking or hasn't necessarily translated into filmmaking yet. So I think that's a challenge, and I think that's a challenge as much for me as for any of the other people currently making. And I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, because I think everybody's trying and feeling around to try to figure out what the sound is. I just don't think we've gotten there yet. It's not like when you watch a John Wayne movie and you hear that Western soundtrack and you're like, yeah, that sounds like America. And okay, look, we are doing that on some level here. I just don't think we've matured, I suppose. So I think
Yeah.
we've got a little ways to go in terms of that. But I will say that there are some great up and coming guys. One of the guys I've just interviewed last year, a guy called Mudia Shole, who's doing interesting stuff in the TV world.
Is this a film composer?
He's a
He's a
composer,
scorer.
yeah.
Wow.
He's
Okay.
a composer. And then there's like, for example, Kyle Shepard, who's a Cape Town based guy. He's a jazz musician, and he's obviously bringing his own flavor in. So
Awesome.
yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
it is happening, but yeah, I guess it's just a challenge to keep that thing happening up until the point that we can really say we've got our lexicon and we've got our language.
Yeah.
Although I suppose the other paradox is that as soon as you say, okay, we've got our language, then somebody else comes along and says, well, now that we've got
Redefines
our
it.
language.
They come along and redefine the language, they expand
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
scope of what you've
exactly.
built. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that's great as well. I mean, so what I found quite interesting is this guy, Ludwig Göransson. I think I'm saying his name correctly, who
I think
did
you've
the
said
Black
it.
Panther.
You pronounce it the most eloquently out of what I've been hearing his name being said. Like, so sounds
Okay.
pretty much right.
Yeah, yeah. So he's a great Hollywood composer. He's a young guy, actually. And he's done a bunch of stuff for Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
He did the movie about the guy who did the atom bomb. I've just forgotten his name.
Yes,
I want to say
Oppenheimer.
Heisenberg. Sorry?
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer. I was going to say Heisenberg, but that's Breaking Bad.
He's still in your Western mode.
Yeah. He also did the music for Black Panther.
Yes. And Sinners.
Yeah, he was great. Although I will say I actually I have a bit of criticism there, and I think that they probably should have found an actual African composer to do that music, because they're out there, and I think it's not obviously Ludwig, if he gets offered the job, he's going to jump at it just like anyone would. But so it's more a criticism of the creators of the film to have said you guys could have maybe just stewarded that process a little bit better. But yeah, I mean that was his attempt at doing African music, and he did well with it. And what I would say is that I think that should be a challenge to us in South Africa to pick up that challenge and continue with it and really keep working at refining that language and getting to a place where we're really confident and can say this is now a real recognizable style that we've developed.
Yes, because I feel more to your point, I feel it hasn't even visually, cinematically, it hasn't been defined at all yet.
Yeah, I mean, we've got this idea that we can have a few indigenous instruments. We can put a few indigenous instruments in, and I think that's a great start. What I'm quite interested in, of course, is following perhaps more polyrhythmic stuff that would have been coming out of Africa in the first place, and of course also looking at traditional African chord progressions, trying to draw inspiration from Maskandi stuff, or traditional Xhosa stuff, or Mpondo stuff, to get even more specific. Not that I would be able to necessarily identify what those chord progressions are.
You already got the lingo, for the fact that you can sort of, just from our prior chat about just the expansiveness of the Xhosa nation. So with that lingo, a bit of research, R&D, man, I can't wait to hear. In fact, we need to chat, dude. There's some cool stuff that we need to collaborate on, both sonically, visually, storyline wise. I'd like to pick a brain more. It's awesome.
That sounds great. So let's I would like to now just pick your brain a little bit in terms of music as well. So what are you, just apart from movies or cinema, what's on your headphones right now? Who are you listening to?
Good question.
Who's really inspiring you at the moment?
Quite a bit. In fact, I'm going to just shamelessly just go through what I've been jamming to recently, because as I said, we feel like we're in a hyper processing information world. There's too much information we're being assaulted with. Let me see. As of recently, man, I've just gone back to my love affair with some alternative and metal music. I feel given my proximity to amapiano and kwaito and house music, I'm losing my inner sensibilities. So I felt like the past couple of weeks, I'm re-loving the rock scene again. So a lot of the Black Keys, they kind of lost their ways as of recently, but I like what they sounded like now. There's a track called Man on a Mission. That's cool. Locally, there's these cool alternative, a trio of them called Imagine, not Imagine Dragon. They did a collaboration with Maglera Doughboy on this cool song called, let me see, sorry. My brain is mush. Internet Girl. This band is called Internet Girl. I think they're Cape Town based.
They're killing it at the moment.
Super cool dudes, man. Super cool. And I love that they collaborated with someone from the deep north of Pretoria, Matlera, who's bringing this hood culture. And then I want to give a shout out to the local band I think you put me on.
Yeah.
Shameless South Africa, Shameless SA. And man, I've been yearning to see a cool rock. There was a metal band in Soweto quite some time ago who was more popular, but I'm not sure if they were making original music or covers, but they had a thing, some brand association with them and so forth. But when I see Shameless, man, and of course the unfortunate has happened to the band recently, and may Tabo rest in peace. But cool, dynamic. It's got this jazzy funk rhythm. At the same time, they could go metal if they want to. It's just amazing. So I've been paying attention to these guys as of lately. Lots of South African artists, man, at work. I'm liking this electronic tempering with a bit of this R&B Afrofusion thing that's going on. There's a lot of. I'm a fan of deeply layered work, sensorially so. So there has to be multiple rhythms playing. I'm a fan of what I call musical fusion. I suppose that's why I'm a fan of rock beyond anything, because
Yeah.
it's an amalgamation of all the instruments, including the vocals, as this one unified body of work that moves you. So, yeah. So, and I think Sinner speaks to that, the idea of blues, which is a godfather rock, that it's so deeply spiritual. And more to your argument, maybe there's something there with Ryan Coogler doing a bit of self-criticism, I feel. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. In Sinners, where he says, the character, Delta Slip, I don't know if you've seen it, he says to the prodigy, blues is not, comes natural within us because it's something we carry from home, from the deep. It's not imposed like that language. And maybe to your criticism of Ludwig, maybe it's something they looked at and said, could I have been a right instrument to be the composer of that? And it speaks to our critique of South African stories. Invictus, completely international cast and crew. I mean, Eastwood directed it as a legend. Matt Damon, Morgan Freeman, all icons, but that's not their story.
Yeah.
Cry Freedom, Denzel Washington playing Steve Biko. You know what I mean? So it speaks to us too. Is that when do we get to own our stories properly from inception to distribution, which is a whole other can of worms to get it.
Yeah, and I suppose it also goes back to the audience as well, which is that if we as the audience don't support those initiatives, then like I can see exactly why, like Invictus, for example, which I have exactly the same criticism as you have with it, and like why it didn't work, and it's unusual because Clint Eastwood usually like nails it, but Invictus was one of them which like just didn't really nail it. And I think that was for exactly that reason. But like when you're trying to pitch that idea to the money people, they're like, well, we need stars. We need people to bring in that money.
Yeah.
Which is obviously one of the real difficult aspects of any form of art, but specifically cinema, because it takes so much money to make a movie that they need to make that money back. And that's, for example, why Hollywood is taking fewer chances these days. And, like why we've got the endless superhero cycles happening, because they need to make money, and then they need to actually post a profit. Otherwise the industry goes kaput. And I think that's why, for example, I think in South African cinema, I would say personally, the idea should be focusing on trying to keep the budgets as low as possible while keeping the quality as high as possible. As per, for example, your reference of like 12 Angry Men, which I think, if I recall correctly, it was all shot in like one room.
Essentially.
Like a similar thing with Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, which is what broke him as a director, was he managed to make this movie in a way it was actually a stage production. It was a play, but they made it into like this kind of phenomenon and he was able to do that because the budget wasn't so high that he had to. He was then able to sort of hold on to his artistic integrity and make the film that he wanted to make, as opposed to having to have the big stars or whatever it was. He was able to actually just make what he needed to make. And that's why I think it's obviously very attractive to the South African psyche. Like, it's often my criticism of a certain kind of South African thought process, which is still very locked into the idea of a gold rush, per like Joburg. Like, Joburg is a gold mining city. So everybody that ends up in Joburg is in some ways can thank the gold rush mentality for ending up in Joburg City. I'm a Joburg now. I live in Cape Town now, but I grew up and spent most of my life in Joburg, and my dad was employed by the diamond mines. So I know the mine mentality, and it's so just to bring it back to movie making, a lot of the problem is in the South African psyche is that we're looking for the thing that's going to hit it big. We're looking to like hit that vein of gold somewhere. And I think that's a mistake when you're trying to build culture. Like you obviously need to be profitable for your investors, but you don't necessarily, I think you don't necessarily want to just like have this like massive phenomenon that like just like blows up and has like a million,
Yeah.
millions of people love what you do. What you need to do is do something that's more authentic and true to yourself, that obviously you have to like make it work financially, but don't necessarily go for that like big strike it lucky mentality, and like try to just tell a great story. And I think that is the thing that will ultimately turn our industry into like an actual mature industry that doesn't necessarily try to be something. Because I see a lot of movies, I'm not going to name any names, but I see a lot of South African movies that are trying to go for like a big budget look or a big budget, like action, big action sequences or all that kind of stuff. And look, on the one hand, like I get it. It's good to kind of exercise that muscle to try to get, you have to visualize beyond where you are to get to a new place.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think it kind of has to be done for the love of it. Like another great example is one of Quentin Tarantino's great friends, Robert Rodriguez, who, and he made El Mariachi on like such a small budget, and it wasn't about the acting or even the action or any of that stuff. It was about just like a really solid story that was able to carry through and like inspire enough people to say, okay, we see what you try to do there.
Yeah.
Let's do that again. And we'll make Desperado this time. And
I like that a lot. I like what you're saying about Rodriguez. Yeah.
And, like I think it would be great if we could have like that. Like I'm really waiting to see like a film that does that from South Africa. That's just like that, like almost like fuck you about the money. Like it's low budget because I have to do it my way. Not because, you're not
performing, with all the due respect of our fellow crafts people in the game. Yeah, there's a lot of performativeness I'm feeling, if I had to put it bluntly, in terms of how we want to be perceived as an industry, as a craft. Intentionality is everything, man. There's, when you intend to tell a great story, regardless of, the tools or whatever is at your disposal, one way or the other, it's going to manifest. What I'm trying to say, my biggest, I think, criticism of our local work collectively, and I've also contributed to a big part of it. We lack, what's the word? Authenticity is that, but it's an extension of it. It's escaped me, but there's a truthfulness, what they call verisimilitude. There's that when you watch a single frame of any of our modern work, there has to be a hint of a lived-in truth that I buy into that world. Whatever it is, it's like there's a truth there. And we're lacking a lot of that because of exactly what we're discussing. Is this idea of wanting to be blown out and commercially appealing. You wanna, there's a feeling of my material is going to break open the lid on what could be the greatest era of the golden age of, say, cinema. And the thing is, tap into the lived-in truths and you will see the magic, because it's going to reflect back to what people experience.
Yeah. And I suppose it's interesting to see, for example, what Hollywood did. Because my argument is like when you look at, for example, the Cold War, it was basically Russia and America. Russia was doing propaganda. It was all sort of state-sponsored propaganda. But of course, Hollywood was like American propaganda too. But the difference was, of course, it was commercial propaganda. It was propaganda that was funded by so-called private enterprise. But I guess the difference is that Hollywood really did manage to create its American story, as it may not even have been a true story, but the mythology that Hollywood managed to generate just It
Yeah,
was, in my opinion, that is the power of America, is that they were able to inspire almost like the rest of the world into their stories.
absolutely.
So that was like my little rant about Hollywood, is that they were like really successful at mythologizing America and the American
Yeah.
story and the American dream. And I think, look, I obviously they had a kind of level of confidence because they were doing it, and they were doing it for themselves. I think that's part
Yeah.
of the problem with South African cinema as well, is that we tend not to be doing it for ourselves. We tend to be
Yes.
doing it for overseas audiences.
Yes.
And I understand why, because there's not that much support locally for film or even series. Although I think that is changing, especially now that Netflix has entered the chat, and like especially with series and stuff starting to come in. But I think what we really need to do, and it's the same thing for music as well, is, and you can see like that's why I'm a Piano, for example, is so popular, because they were making the music for themselves. They weren't making it for overseas audiences. They were
Yes.
making it for themselves. And this is,
Absolutely.
of course, one of my big criticisms of South African rock music, is like so often in South African rock, the bands are trying to break it overseas. They're trying to get overseas famous. They're not trying to get local famous. And once again, I understand why they're doing it, because everybody tells them from when they're 15 years old, there's no market for rock and roll in South Africa. And so they say, okay, well, if I love rock and roll, then the only way I'm going to make it work is if somebody likes me overseas. But I think that's really half the battle, is to try to like develop that market. And I'm not sure how you do that. I am but a humble musician. I don't know how to create
Yeah.
the need in South Africa for those local stories. But I think it is happening slowly.
It
And I
is.
guess maybe I'm just being too impatient, because I will say, I think that Africa generally, but South Africa, as much as we're having problems at the moment with like the
Alles.
general stuff that's happening, I think this is the African century, honestly, but we're at the
Yeah.
very beginning of it now. So it doesn't look like it's the African century. I think in retrospect, and like, what are we? We're in the year 2026 now. In the year 2100, we'll be like, oh yeah. We see
Yeah.
what was going on there. We've made it now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dude, I'm going to say something to add on to what you're saying. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of where we lack genuinely as an entertainment industry. Certainly from a filmmaking point of view, and I mean filmmaking long form cinema, there's this inherent underestimation of the intellect of the South African audience in its entire spectrum, where the powers that be are constantly talking down to the audience, under marketing, but we quick to take the very best of our essence and sell it to the world, but we're not good at selling it to ourselves. And that's a big part of what you're saying, is that what America is able to do, while we're able to fall in love with American cinema. I was born in the 90s. I grew up on a lot of these as I grew up, and these action cinema in early 2000s. All of these films, what did they speak about? America's self-belief in itself. Constantly, every character you meet, they saw Americana, unapologetically so, that I'm able to forgive them now in their ignorance of the greater world, because of how deeply rooted they are within themselves. And that's the culture we need. The things like Amapiano has brought it home. The new generation, the so-called Ama 2000, the 2Ks, they're the step in the right direction, because there's this unapologetic fearlessness of them being purely South Africans, regardless of race, of creed, of socio-economic disposition. They're like, hey, I'm South African, you're South African, let's kick it, let's rock, let's build a culture. Hence what we're seeing. So you are right, we are at the beginning of the turn of our fortunes, and the big shame, big pity, or the unfortunate thing with change is that change is only appreciated in retrospect. If you're living through change, it's a shit show.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
And
never
we're
a
like, at the
nice
moment,
thing.
at the moment, we're like, we don't know what the hell's going on. It's chaos.
Yeah,
But
it's pure.
like this is the punk rocker in me. I'm like, but chaos is a good thing, though.
It
Chaos
is.
is actually that's like the fertile soil out of which grows like amazing things.
100%, man. 100%.
So I think I need to call the conversation here. Otherwise it's going to get way too long. I would love to just like
Yes, yes.
continue talking, honestly, because it's been
We could
such a
do a
great
part two
conversation.
or whenever, man. Whenever an opportunity comes again, we could do an extension, a follow up if your podcast rolls that way. I'm a
Absolutely.
massive
Yeah.
friend and a
Yeah.
fan of what you're building here. So, and now that you've told me, I need to now revisit the other stuff, the other guys you profiled, because that's what it is. I'm a massive fan of podcasts, and it's nice to see homegrown podcasts that speak about the craft of things of all.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a great chat, and as we've said, we'll definitely do it again at some point.
Looking forward
Hopefully,
to it.
have some new awesome projects to talk about. And thank you so much.